So I know you're like a huge history buff. You would probably live at the archives if you could. Why'd you want to write another book about our province's, I guess for lack of a better term, strange past?
There's just so many stories to tell. It's what like you said, I just love doing that. There's so many ghosts to set free that have been lost in time. And you know what? When I was doing the first book, I thought, am I going to find enough stories to fill a book? And the more you dig, the more you uncover, and then your radar is starting to sense those kind of things, and they start to come from all kinds of places. It's almost like when you're talking near your phone and your phone starts to put ads up for things that you mentioned. When you're tuned into something, these stories start to show up, and I just had to write another one. They started to pile up, and they were calling to me.
Does this book take a different approach than your first book in terms of how you share the stories, or do you see it as a continuation?
It's pretty much a continuation, I think. The first one really began. They almost take a reverse approach, though. The first one began with me spending time at the archives and going through photos that maybe I'd never come across before, and then saying, I want to write a story about this. I don't know what this photo is for. This one started with the stories that popped up during that first researching, and then the photos came afterwards. So it was sort of a reverse approach this time, but it really is a continuation.
So let's get right into this, because I want to hear some of these stories. So one of the things that people might not realize, and you share this, is about Kenora. What is shared about Kenora as it relates to our province?
Well, Kenora, in its early time when it was known as Rat Portage, was claimed by Manitoba, but it wasn't official. Manitoba claimed it. Ontario was like, you know what? I think that's actually ours. And the story I have in the book explains a lot of the convoluted political aspects of it. But essentially, both provinces were laying claim to it, and that meant everything doubled up. There was 2 court systems, 2 police forces, 2...
like Manitoba and Ontario.
Manitoba and Ontario.
Competing for this piece.
Yeah. And there was actually, the people in Rat Portage had 2 federal representatives. They elected parliamentarians for Ontario and Manitoba. And it got so absurd at one time that the police forces were arresting each other. The police chief of Ontario arrested the police chief of Manitoba. They were, during election times, they had to have a military guard Manitoba so that Ontario didn't interfere with the elections on their side. It was absurd, yeah.
How did it ultimately play out for the fact that obviously Kenora is not part of Manitoba?
Right, and what it went to was the Privy Council in England. That was the highest court in Canada at the time. It went there for them to ultimately decide who it belonged to. But it was an incredible border dispute that came along because of these vague descriptions way back when Rupert's Land existed and Canada was just being formed, and there wasn't really any defined western border to Ontario or eastern border to Manitoba. So they both kind of were like, well, we'll take over here. I
may be even showing my ignorance here, but I've never heard the term Rat Portage.
Yeah, so Rat Portage was because it was named after the portage of muskrats between the Winnipeg River and Lake of the Woods at the time. Kenora actually comes from 3 places: Keewatin, Norman, and Rat Portage. The 2 letters of each of those names.
What other stories in here, because there are many, are some of your faves that you want to share with people this morning?
There's so many. There's the archives itself is just not just a wealth of history, but it's got its own incredible story behind it. Some of the characters I've come across. I think you guys might have come across this when you were in the Interlake before, but Percy Moggy and the fugitive who hid out in the Interlake for 10 months. Yeah, the cabin.
When we were in St. Laurent earlier this year. Fascinating.
Oh, it's so great. And you know what? There's also 2 kind of aspects to the book. There's stories, and then there's a sort of a sidebar threading through it of firsts, accomplishments in the Northwest, that not just in Manitoba but in the West, that were first done here, and some of those are incredible. Like there's these odd ones. The paint roller was invented by a Manitoban, and next to
the fuzzy paint roller thing that we put on the really
and next to the safety pin, the paint roller is considered the most used invention in the world.
And a Manitoban invented it. Yeah. Why and who? Like, how did that even, like, what's the story behind that?
I'm not telling you.
No. Read the book, lady. You also learn quite a lot in this book. You explore what Manitoba could have been. Now, particularly when it comes to architecture, like the Richardson Building, for example, and the Golden Boy. So what did you learn around that?
Yeah, that's what's interesting about it. History isn't just what used to be. It's also about what could have been. And there's decisions along the way, economic conditions, like the Depression is what really killed a lot of plans. So in the archives, as I was mentioning, with its wealth of information, there are images of proposed buildings. There's correspondences. So some of those images show what City Hall could have looked like, these grand, elaborate, Roman, Greco-looking buildings. The Richardson Building would have been a dynamic Art Deco, almost something looked like from Gotham, right on the corner. Yeah, and then the Golden Boy, the design for the Golden Boy, there's correspondence between the French sculptor and Manitoba, and the Golden Boy was one of the original plans, had him with a winged helmet and wings on his ankles, almost like of a Roman or Greek god. So you can see these ideas of what may have been. But in terms of the buildings, the Depression hit, those plans got set aside, and when they came back, the designs were scaled back.
How has writing this book, and I guess, both of the books, but this book in particular, changed the way that you view the province?
I don't know that it's changed the way I viewed it, but it's made me appreciate it more. It's just made me look at things, and what I hope it does for people who read the book. I hope they look at not just our province, but wherever you live, and wonder about what may have been, or why is this like this. It's just made me look at a deeper context of where we are and who we are.
How are we going to give these books away? We have 2 beautiful copies of Prairie Oddities to give away. And do you want historical stories, or what are you thinking? What are you
how about people tell us their favorite Manitoba history or prairie history?
I love that. 788-3205. Get those historical stories. What's your little tidbit you want to share? What's the thing you share at parties? I bet you're super fun at parties now, Darren. Thank you for coming in and telling us about it. Congratulations.
Thank you for having me.